Hey everyone, my name is Mike Henry, and this is my Procreate 4 demo for the piece I just call Sleep. Before we get into it, I'd like to quickly remind everyone that we have a Discord channel called Zat's Art Chat. If you don't know what Discord is, it's basically a chat program, although there's also the ability to talk if I were to open up rooms to do that, although I haven't done that yet. It's mostly used by streamers and gamers and stuff, but we've got a really cool little community going, and I highly encourage anybody that wants to talk about art and just sort of hang out, come on over and check it out. And I'll even leave a link down below. Alright, let's get right into it. So this here is the finished piece, something that I haven't done really that much before, but I'll do it right here. Let's outline the actual brushes that I used throughout this whole thing. So I used the soft brush for a lot of it, which I normally don't do, but I did for this. We used the hard brush, both of those are in the airbrushing category, and then I used the Hessian brush. That was to get the dreadlocks so that they looked like they actually had texture to them instead of just doing it all by hand. So let's start the actual process here. So when I started this, I didn't know what I was going to draw. I had a bunch of like half-started nothing pieces going, and then I just wanted to do something a little bit simple. So I started by drawing a woman's face, which you can see here, and then I just sort of started drawing this body, and then I was like, okay, is she like dancing? Her face is really calm, so I don't know if I want to do any type of a combat thing or anything. And then I was like, you know what, actually it looks like she's sort of sleeping, so let's actually just change the camera and we're looking down on her and she's in a bed and she's just sleeping. And that was the entire genesis for, I guess, the bulk of this piece, the bulk of the composition of it. I knew I wanted it to be rendered a few videos ago. I asked if you guys wanted to see some more rendered stuff, and some of you said yes. So instead of doing something that would have strong lines and then have flats and like a shadow layer, which is faster to do, but maybe not quite as interesting once you sort of got that technique down. It's pretty easy. I thought, okay, let's just focus on doing something rendered. Now, usually when I do something rendered, unless there's a purpose to having a good drawing, I don't actually do a very thorough drawing. I do it rough like this. In fact, my Pink Hair Girl book, which some of you may have or have seen, or at least you have the digital PDF of it, you saw that in the roughs in the back of that, a lot of them are just super rough and messy. That's because, as fine as it is to work from something super clean, and I do that from time to time, it saves a lot of time if I'm the one who's going to take it from the rough sketch all the way to the final paint. I might as well make a lot of the decisions in the painting process. So now you can see here I got the rough all done, and I start going in with flats. There's going to be a couple of moments during this where she gets a little weird looking because I did the hair in tons of different layers. I'll actually show some of those when we get there. You can see here that I'm going through and putting in all these individual dreadlocks, but you can't really see what's going on here from a layer perspective, except that I'm turning a lot of things on and off, and you can kind of see how that's working. I wanted to make sure that I got the tubularness of each one of these dreadlocks, and so I thought that one of the ways that that would be more easily achieved is by keeping all of this very separate. So at this point now, you're looking at it and it just looks like it's mostly black hair with a couple of the stray dreadlocks sort of coming out. But in a second, I'll show the actual layer stack so you guys can see what that looks like. After I figure out that a green top, and then the pillows and the sheets, I just quickly throw this layer over the whole thing where I've got a multiply on the left side for the shadows and then an overlay on the right side for the light, and that was just me to quickly test out, hey, is this going to work? So now we're going to do the skin. And some pieces, when you're in the middle of doing them, you go into this, I've talked about it before, this sort of valley of despair where it's like, you know that you can paint and you know what the thing's gonna kind of look like, but you hit a phase where you feel like it's not coming together. Fortunately, this was not one of those for me. If you've watched sort of all my videos, I definitely reference it. It happens fairly often enough. But in this one, I was pretty excited about this, and I was pretty excited about what I was going to try and do here with some of the lighting and all that. So I was pretty confident. You're gonna see in a minute that when it goes from rough to flats and then to render, there's a couple of things that happens with her lip her upper lip, and I think I alter her lower lip. Yeah, because like right here you can see that I render the lower lip, and she's got, like, I guess if you're going to perceive it correctly, she's got a little bit of a bulge there, and I didn't want that because it almost looks like she got popped in the lip. And so eventually you'll see me go in and tweak that a little bit, and I sort of sharpen up her, almost like where her philtrum is going into her upper lip, but you'll see that when it comes. Because I move on and I do a lot of stuff, and then I come back to it, basically. So in painting this, ultimately you end up seeing a blue light source. I go from sort of like a warm, because her skin tone is warm, shadows and mid range, sorry, and then I go up to like a more blue mid and highlight, and you don't see that right here, but that's because sometimes it's really hard for me to think that way, color-wise. It's very easy for me to think in cool shadows and warm highlights, but sometimes it's really hard for me to think in warmer shadows and cooler highlights. So I started by just sort of painting her a little monochromatically, and then after I determined some colors, I went in and I swapped out those values with the blue values. Also, a good example of, you probably watch this channel because you like the way I paint and you think you learn stuff from this, and that maybe you think that I have a lot of stuff figured out. However, as true as that might be for some things, there's always going to be stuff that when you try something new, you just don't have it figured out. One of those things here is the selection of color when I'm going from those warm shadows to those cool highlights. So what I do, and I can't remember if it gets captured really here in the time lapse, but I actually just took a blue and I put it on top, a blue swatch, and put it on top of a swatch that was the color of her skin, and then lowered the opacity to try and find what that would do to it. What would that do to the her skin color when it goes through that blue light? And then after finding that color, I went and replaced those with those blue colors. But there still needed to be some tweaking, but that was like a way, it was like a scientific way for me to explore what's going to happen when the blue light mixes with her skin. And because my brain just doesn't have those colors sort of like pre-selected. It's not something that I do frequently enough. I have another piece in the YouTube videos called Flower, which is also on a Caucasian girl, so it's like trying to find how light reacts to the various skin types. But I do almost the exact same thing, if I remember correctly, where I use like a swatch and I slap some blue on it and I try to figure it out. So again, I think where I'm going with sort of rambling through that part of the process is try to always still be experimental, and try to always, as logically as you can, think about the practicality of, the reality of what's happening. If you're trying to figure out what happens when like red light hits a green thing, put a swatch of green down, put some red down, try some layer effects, adjust some values, some opacity, and see what it does. And that's the way that you eventually explore and see, and then that can get stored away in your mind. And you can always whip that out again then later if you do it enough and you practice it enough. So that was me covering that while a lot of other things have gone on in the background. I thought it was okay to talk over this because if you watch a lot of my videos, you know a lot of what's going on here. You know about how I apply the darkening around the eye, how I apply the lip color, how I get some of the blood to come through the skin on like the ears and the nose. And all of the other colors that are going on here, like the dark of her skin all the way to the light of her skin. In this way of painting, this is all color picked. This isn't like a shadow layer and then a highlight layer that's set to like an overlay or something like that. Although I did just use a white, I think, overlay there to lighten her palm a bit. And then right there you can see the shift of her skin overall. So now we're in the world of warmer shadows and cooler highlights. So now I'm actually doing that for the hair. I'm going for cooler highlights. Now this is something though where I'm not having a problem with deciding what the right color is. This I'm guessing much more accurately. And then if I have to adjust the opacity a little bit, then I will. Let me zoom in here for a sec. So this is where we're going to use the Hessian brush to get some of the texture into her dreadlocks. Now, I always try to keep things a little symbolic, so I'm not going for exactly what it looks like, but I wanted to get the texture in there so that it felt at least like you could touch it and that it would be a different material than like her skin or her shirt, her like tank top nighty type thing, or the sheets. So I thought that brush was like perfect. Again, I referenced it at the beginning of the video, but it's in the natural section of the brushes. And so what I'm going through here is I've got these super clean dread layers that I'm applying the Hessian mid-tone to. And that's giving it some texture, but then what I'll have to go in later is, because a dreadlock is not a perfectly clean tube, is I take that base color that the dreadlock is, and each individual dreadlock tendril dread, and I take the Hessian brush and add the sort of fuzziness to that individual lock. That way it just doesn't look too clean and too artificial, and then the texture that you're putting on for the midtones and the highlights actually speaks to the form of what it actually is. Just so that you guys can see how these layers were originally set up, let's pause this for a second and check that out. So I don't remember what stage I took these screenshots, but you can see here that I've got lots of little groupings with the extra shadow or the light mid-tone layer on top of that, and you can see that it took a lot to get everything really separate. Ultimately, because of layer counts, I end up merging a lot of that together, but it was really good for keeping it all separate and being able to do selections when I had to. I actually didn't have to do that many, but I wanted to be prepared for when I got to that stage. So we're a little overcropped right here. There's going to be a little bit of things happening outside of frame, but that way when something does happen in frame, you should be able to see it really clearly. At this point, I'm adding some of the extra noise with that Hessian brush around the dreadlocks so that you can see some of it happening. You're gonna see that one curly one right there. Yeah, it just got filled in. So giving it a little bit of texture, and now there's the last bit of highlights. Dark hair and not that much light in the scene, so you don't have to go crazy with those highlights right there. So we're wrapping up the hair portion of this and now moving on to the sheets. So for the sheets, I used the brushes. I didn't use any brushes other than what I mentioned at the beginning, but I also use selection a lot for this. It's a good way to get that hard edge, select it on a new layer, fill it, or maybe select it and then use a soft brush to do what you need to do there. But it gives you that hard edge, which is really nice when you're trying to communicate something like bed sheets, which depending on the material, the type of bed sheet that it is, it can have some hard cuts here or there. And again, I'm going for, something resembling kind of real lighting and materials, but I'm not going for true realism here. So I really just wanted to make sure that I was contrasting the various materials, and by that I mean sort of in a technical sense. So it's like skin, hair, nails, sheets, pillows, all that. And that's really what I'm going for. So it's not 100% realistic, but it hopefully communicates what I'm looking for. Something I want to take a minute here to explain, because it's going to go by really fast at the end here, is I actually completed this piece and was really happy with it. I posted it in the Discord that I mentioned earlier, and I even shared it on Instagram, and I had it as a background wallpaper on my computer, which is a really great way to figure out whether or not you can actually live with something for a while. So I recommend it if you're ever going to get a tattoo, because you'll be staring at it all the time, and you'll see if you want to stare at it your whole life. But anyways, after staring at it for a while, I was like, there's some extra things here that I need to do to this to really take it a little further. And so you're going to see here that in this really fast end of the video type thing, there's going to be a bunch of little adjustments, and then it kind of looks like it's done for like a split second, and then it's going to get like a bunch more adjustments. So you can see here on that multiply layer, I'm cutting where the shadow is going to hit. You can see it right there. And then I fill it all in on the left side and turn it to multiply. And now I'm blocking out where the light source, where it's being blocked, and then casting the shadow across her. And now I've gone in and I've turned that off for a second, and I'm making sure that I've got some of the surrounding objects that are bouncing onto her a little bit, that I've got those all in there right. And then I'll lower that opacity quite a bit. So at this point, I've got bounce lights figured out, I've got the shadow layer figured out, and then I put in this layer, which is like an overlay layer set to like a really bright yellow orange, and then that's just, it exists anywhere that the shadow doesn't. So it's like that, and then select the shadow, and then delete away from it after it's been filled by the whole screen. I just worded that really weirdly. I filled the whole screen, set it to overlay, selected the shadow layer, and then deleted away from it. That's the right way to say that sentence. So now what you're seeing here is after I've gone back in again, and see I fixed the bounce light on her nose, I made that a little bit cleaner. I adjust the shadow that's being cast across her a little bit. I follow her form a little bit more smartly. I more accurately represent the cast of the shadow from the light source, and do some blurring around the edges and all of that. And right here is where all those changes are going to come in. It's going to go super fast, I know it. Here we go, it starts right here. And so this is me just doing a bunch of little last minute tweaks that go by really, really quickly. Okay, so that's it. And I hope you liked it, and I hope that the explanations that I put into this one were good. Some of it's a lot of repetition of previous things that I've done in the past, but I hope that it was valuable to you. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing, and hopefully I'll see you on Discord. If you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.